DraftKings studio, unoccupied today in Boston. How about that? Jesse and Emerson enjoying some time off. Well-deserved for all the hard work. We still got a great show for you guys. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us. Leave us a 5-star rating and check us out live Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on the DraftKingsNetwork.com. DraftKings YouTube channel, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, and more. Fun going guest-wise today. Ryan Fitzpatrick, former NFL quarterback and part of the Thursday Night on Prime crew. Chris Long, longtime NFL defensive end, host of the Greenlight podcast with his brother Kyle and a number of other great dudes. And it is Wednesday, which means hour number one. We got our good friend Charlotte Wilder here, co-host of Oddball with Amin El Hassan, joining us back here and now. Charlotte, how you doing, bud?
Oh, phenomenal. How are you guys? What a Wednesday. Did I say that when I feel like I have this rotating list of things that I say when you come to me. So today we're going to go with what a Wednesday.
I like that. What you should say what a Wilder Wednesday though, shouldn't you? Would you not want to use your own name? Yeah.
Probably. What a Wilder Wednesday. How are you guys? What's going on in the sports world?
There we go.
There we go. See, she knows the right places to go on this. By the way, you guys can catch Oddball with her and Amin every day but Monday here on the DraftKings Network. Great job. And we've got a lot of basketball to cover with you. Erik Spoelstra is big rich right now. We have got Draymond Green doing some self-reflection. Very angry people in Toronto. But we do have a little NFL to start with, and someone that you actually know very well, Charlotte, or got to know very well, in Mike Vrabel. We are all getting ready for a lot of coaching moves around the NFL this offseason. I don't know, and Dad, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. I had no expectation that Mike Vrabel was going to be fired, but that is exactly what happened yesterday as we got the news coming out of Tennessee. Amy Adams Strunk, the owner there, came out and announced the news that the team was moving on from Mike Vrabel after 6 seasons as their head coach. He had 3 playoff appearances, won the division twice, was the 1 seed in the AFC and the AP Coach of the Year in 2021. And now, a year after hiring a new GM in Ron Carthen, they're getting set to find their next head coach. Dad, did you see this coming at all?
I didn't. Vrabel is extremely well liked. What did he have? 4 winning seasons are out of the gate. The last couple have been losing seasons. I get it, but listen, he's been in the playoffs, and sometimes we wondered how, because it's like I don't think he ever really had that big time quarterback. We didn't buy into that with Tannehill, right? Had a great back in Derrick Henry, and we always know Vrabel for defense. And he's so well liked, and he did lead his teams to a number 1 seed, to the playoffs, though the last couple of years have been worse than what he's used to. So I found it interesting, and Charlotte, I'm going to read the statement from Amy Adams Strunk, and it was a lot of big words, but I think we know where it goes. She says, as the NFL continues to innovate and evolve, I believe the teams that best positioned for sustained success will be those who empower an aligned and collaborative team across all football functions. Basically, I think, Charlotte, correct me if I'm wrong, saying we need to get up with the times and have more voices involved in this thing.
Yeah, which, it's always so interesting, right? Because I often don't think that firing a coach, especially one who's as beloved as Vrabel. I mean, the Titans star running back Derrick Henry, after Vrabel was fired, said, "I'm shocked. He's a leader of men." I can't really think of a coach quite as beloved anecdotally by his team on a team that is not a powerhouse contender every year. I think what Vrabel did with the Titans in those playoff runs is pretty remarkable. I also think that, yes, they've had past 2 frustrating seasons in terms of wins and losses, but I don't think he's had a ton of help on the management side. Like, what have they gotten him? What have they given him to work with? By all accounts, he's done pretty well, given that, like, most people, if you're not a fan of the Titans or you don't follow the NFL very closely, would be like, I think there's one running back, maybe Derrick Henry. Is it like that's what they would think of when they think of the Titans? So for him to have done what he's done, I think that it probably the line collaboration across entities or whatever Excel garbage speak business talk was thrown at us makes me think that they want someone who's going to do exactly what they want and not ask too many questions.
I would have loved someone to put that statement in front of you or I, Mike. It would be like, can we use our own words? Do we have to say this? I don't.
Anyone got a pen? I'm going to go ahead and just fix a couple of. I got a couple of notes that I'd like to run by you here.
These
in words
big
that
words
make
out.
sense.
What's interesting is they also talked about trading him. Now, when you trade a coach, which is different than trading a player, unless a player has a no trade clause, and we've only had one of those in the NFL. You see those in other sports. But to trade a coach, it has to be consent on both sides. The coach has to agree to it. The coach basically has a no trade clause. The coach, both parties have to agree. But she said, we didn't want to put ourselves behind the eight ball a little bit with finding another coach. By a trade, it could be a longer process. And if it doesn't work out the way we want, we go to the back of the line with coaches that are going to start to get hired. So they didn't want to find themselves in that, kind of stuck with their feet in the mud on going through the process of a trade that may not work, and then all of a sudden be holding the bag saying, okay, now we have to fire him, and now a bunch of coaches have been hired that we can't get right now. But it just seems like this is the old GM coach work together. Now, in this case, GM's gone, new GM comes in, and things start to change a little bit, even though I agree that this was a little surprising.
Well, yeah, and I think that's what's interesting about this timeline and why when I hear all that corporate mumbo-jumbo, I do wonder, and we haven't seen it corroborated anywhere. In fact, I've seen multiple national reporters indicate that the relationship between Ron Carthon and Mike Vrabel was not the problem here, because most people would look and think, all right, you reorged last year, you brought in Ron, the GM and the head coach are usually supposed to be in lockstep, and if things aren't lining up there, then you might have a problem. But the way they went about this, Dad, was always indicative of, hey, we think that this was we didn't acquire the right talent problem, not a coaching problem. When you fire John Robinson last year and move on with him without clearing house with the coach, that's at least to me the message that sends. And to Charlotte's point, I always called Mike Vrabel the NFL's MacGyver. He was built in that Tomlin model where you just looked up and he was in the playoffs. Somehow he was in the playoffs. Somehow he was contending to win a division. When talent-wise we looked and said, all right, defensively they've had some good pieces, but offensively, especially going back to the draft a couple of years ago, you messed up the situation with A.J. Brown so bad that you end up trading him on draft day and getting embarrassed so thoroughly when he comes back and plays you the next year that you decide to part with your GM about the week after that Philadelphia loss. And now to come to this point, Dad, when, don't get me wrong, Ron Carthon in year one had some hits, especially in the draft, right? You look at some of the bright spots on this team. Will Levis, there's hope that he can be the guy in the future. Peter Skoronski out of Northwestern on the O-line looked pretty darn good for them up front. Tyjae Spears out of Tulane had a really good year in that backfield taking carries from Derrick Henry. So there's reason to believe Ron Carthon is up for the task here as they start to do that. But 1 year does not enough difference make when even listening to Ron Carthon in his press conference, who, by the way, had to stand up there and answer these questions by himself while Amy Adams Strunk got to do her portion of this in a very controlled interview environment where nothing was going to be difficult for her. Ron Carthon did say, yeah, I don't know how good you could have expected us to be down the stretch when I think in the last couple games we're down 9 starters. It's hard enough to win this league anyway. So I look at all of that and then still try and make the math with this firing of a guy in Vrabel who, Charlotte's right, is a vibes guy. And it is, coaching in general is hard to put a finger on outside of the scheme guys what exactly goes on. But I think we're all pretty comfortable in saying Mike Vrabel has had a net positive effect on the overall culture in Tennessee in a way that's pretty easy to see.
And he's going to have a job, there's no doubt, and a lot of people are already putting him in New England if Belichick leaves. But Charlotte, I wonder if ownership now Amy is the daughter of Bud Adams, who was around in the owner when I was the Houston in Houston with the Oilers, now in Tennessee, and obviously she took over there. So I wonder if Charlotte, where people are trying to replicate, right? That's what we do in the NFL. Are we going to see a coach that tries to replicate an LA offense, a San Francisco offense, a Miami offense, a Detroit offense? We're shifting, we're motion, this is kind of the offense of today. And, one of the top guys on everybody's list is going to be Ben Johnson, from Detroit. Their offense, I think, is like 4th in the league as far as shift and motion, probably behind those other teams I just mentioned as well. So I wonder if we're going to start to see kind of a pattern of how teams want to progress.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've sort of already seen that. I mean, everyone says the NFL is a copycat league, but what was it, 2 or 3 years ago when it was like if you had ever shaken Sean McVay's hand, suddenly you had a head coaching job.
Yeah.
Shout out Cliff Kingsbury, or you were just handsome, like, which I think probably just applies across all businesses. If you're a good looking white guy, you've probably got a better chance. But I do think that sure, yes, probably they're going to try to go out and get somebody like a Shanahan or a McVay. But I think that only gets you so far because it depends so largely on the pieces that you have around you. And it's funny, the New England stuff. As soon as I got the news alert, Vrabel's out at Tennessee, and I was like, oh, New England. And then I was like, I started laughing because I was like, how many people just got that alert and immediately were like, we don't need Bill anymore, he's out. But from a actual football personnel perspective, I actually do think that the best person New England could get would be Vrabel, based on vibes, based on how players feel about him, based on the goodwill he could command in that building, because they need a reset culturally as well. I still am not going to believe that Bill is gone until he's walking out of the building. But I think that, yes, these teams want, flashy offensive coaches, but you really need what your team needs. And I don't think every team can flourish under that kind of coaching. And Vrabel is a guy who can, as you said, Mike, put a team together with duct tape.
I think it's interesting you mentioned the fit for him in New England. Obviously, everyone knows his time there as a player, being a part of those teams under Bill. But given what we're also hearing coming out of New England right now, Trent Brown was very candid about some of the things he thought were a problem in New England, and kind of unloaded on this idea, saying certain things about the way players are treated structurally, with not getting their schedule in advance in a way that helps them plan with their families the way that people on other teams do. Some of the moves that he thought should or shouldn't have been made. Mike Vrabel checks the boxes of both being of the New England cloth, knowing exactly how to get down around there, how different that building is, but also, Dad, it seems like way more personable in the way that he deals with players, in a way that might be refreshing given what they're coming off of with Bill, knowing that I'm sure Bill has relationships with players, but we understand the rule has been one way. It's been an iron fist kind of place.
And we know the athlete of today is a little bit different, right? I'm not going to sit there and say softer, which everybody uses, but it's different the way players are acting and are treated than it has been, which is true in it's true outside of sports. It's true everywhere. Generations
Gen Z,
are
am I
different.
right?
So well, there you go.
Which, by
so
the way, I
Belichick,
love dumping on Gen Z now, Dad. I can see why you guys came at us for so long, because I got to tell you, these kids are annoying the hell out of me. I'm sick and tired of them.
And you don't mind throwing a few darts, do you now? But so that and then we say the Patriot way, and again, it's the Belichick way. It's not the Patriot way. It's the Belichick way. And how many times later on did you hear guys that say it's miserable there, but you get a chance for a ring, and that's what you want, is you want the ring, so you go there. But the last few years, obviously, it hasn't been that way. So you do wonder if you need an updated Belichick way. And if you're talking about that with the relationship with players today, Vrabel, Charlotte would be the perfect guy, right? Because he was drafted there, played under him, but has the ear of the younger player now as well. So I could see that natural step for him.
Well, also something that Trent Brown said was that you don't have a Tom Brady anymore. It's not like, hey, come to New England, you can play with Tom Brady. He also said Foxborough is not a vacation destination, which someone from Massachusetts who has been to Foxborough, no disrespect, but it's more of a long street than a town. So I think that there is some truth to that. So you kind of have to recalibrate how you do things. I think for a long time, the Patriots had all the leverage in the NFL. It was like, do you want to win a Super Bowl? Do you want to play with the greatest quarterback of all time? Probably. Great. Come on over. We're not going to pay you. In fact, we don't even really pay our quarterback, but you're going to get a ring. And now that doesn't hold up. And it's been fascinating to watch Belichick not be able to recalibrate or adjust to that. Also, what happens to the Patriots if Belichick is out as GM? Also, like, to me, it is so fascinating because people forget that Belichick, I mean, you guys don't forget, but like when we talk about is Belichick going to be out as head coach, it's like, sure, also might be out as GM. So then that becomes a total rebuild. And hopefully someone comes in who is not just drafting lacrosse players out of D3 colleges, but real pieces that, as Trent Brown said, you have to pay and you have to value.
Yeah, it is. I always think of Mike Tomlin saying.
Real quick, I'm not going to rip Foxborough too much because they do have a Bass Pro Shops right there, which,
Sorry.
That's
which
a great vacation spot right there.
If you like swimming naked, Foxborough is the place for you. I always think of the Mike Tomlin phrase. We want
ever said that.
Yeah.
Well,
put that on the
someone in the news.
Put that on the brochure for Foxborough's Board of Tourism from Mike Golic, home of nude Bass Pro Shop swimmers.
There you go.
Because I generally tend to think of the Mike Tomlin phrase, we want volunteers, not hostages. You got a few hostages if you're recruiting to New England. That's just the way the news goes. Although the desirability of Mike Vrabel and the way we've talked about here, Dad, is I think what for some people might be frustrating when it came to the balking on the idea of a trade for Mike Vrabel, who was going to be inherently valuable to a number of franchises. Now, he's going to jump near the top, I'd imagine, on a lot of people's list because instead of coordinator we hope might be good, you have head coach we've seen put the ball through the basket, and the fact that they weren't willing to explore that, I mean, and I understand the difficulties in trading a coach are there for exactly the reasons that you mentioned, but we've also seen in the past can net you some pretty big bags. I mean, when John Gruden got traded to the Bucks, they got 2 firsts and 2 seconds for him. That's a haul, and that's capital that could help your team when you got to when you've got a valuable asset that you're not maximizing a return on there for a guy in Mike Vrabel, who, again, I know coaching is hard to quantify from the outside looking in because we don't see all the stuff day to day. But Charlotte, you got to peek under the hood with them when they went on their good run through the playoffs. And I think you kind of saw the way that interpersonally and team management, which I think we undervalue from a head coaching standpoint, really shines with him.
Totally. And I mean, you guys have heard me say this. I think environment is everything. I think that the team management and personality fit is a much bigger part of all of this than maybe some might think. Vrabel, I covered their 2021 playoff run when they went to, the divisional round in Baltimore. And I was at Sports Illustrated at the time, and I said to my editor, I was like, I think I should go to this because I think they might win. And everyone was like, okay, knock yourself out. And then they did. And it was also around the time that Vrabel had said he would cut a certain body part off, a valuable one for men, if it meant that he would win a Super Bowl. And I had a one-on-one interview after his press conference with him. And I was like, it was all the internet was talking about. I was like, I would be a bad journalist if I didn't ask him this. And I was like, you said that you would cut off and he was like, my what? And I was like, okay, well, don't do that. But, I was like, it is one of the lowlights and highlights of my career as a journalist in sports. Like if someone asks me what I do, I'm like, well, here's an example. But then I went on to cover them with in the AFC Championship against the Chiefs, and that's where I met Paul Rudd. So Vrabel has a near and dear place in my sports journalism heart, you guys.
Understandably so. I am thinking about the most authoritative way he could begin the press conference as the head coach of the New England Patriots by slamming a certain thing down on the table to let everyone know his intention to bring this team back to glory in Foxborough. Bottom line is he's going to be somewhere because the Titans fired a really good coach, and whoever they hire next is going to walk in with a weird bullseye on their back because of it. Guys, as we sat here talking about the Titans, I found myself getting mad, and the Stugotz in me welled up, and I couldn't resist the urge, the overwhelming desire to just rip off the Titans. Who do you think you are? The more I think about it, firing Mike Vrabel. Like, who do you guys think you are as an organization? You come in and you steal the Houston Oilers jerseys from the Texans, you rub it in their face and then lose, and then you fire a good coach here and think you're going to go out here and do better, hiring Bobby Slowick, who actually probably could do a pretty good job offensively, and Will Levis trying to maximize.
Yeah.
But honestly, who do they think they are at this point? That was my big takeaway, so I just had to get that off my chest. It felt like the right thing to say to just sideswipe the Titans. You're right, Charlotte. The nerve, the undying nerve of all of this. So it's going to be very interesting to watch what they do. Charlotte, I was thinking about this, and you brought up something the other night talking about the national championship in college football. Mm-hmm. I'm curious for you. I don't watch the trophy ceremonies at the end of championship games in most sports anymore, but definitely not in college football, because I carry a significant amount of PTSD from being covered in 2013 loser confetti against Alabama. And so I don't like watching other people experience joy because I'm extremely petty. I was wondering what your thoughts were watching that game, where we got a kind of a lackluster game overall, and then Michigan ends up capping off one of the more bizarre seasons on planet Earth.
Yeah, I don't know if this makes you feel better or worse, Mike, but I thought of you. And I did not text you because I was like, I'm not going to do you the
rub it in
injustice. Yeah. But I was, because, they just, nothing, losing in college sports is a particular kind of pain that you do not see in the pros, because in the pros, obviously everybody knows this, you get paid. In college sports, what is it, 2% of college athletes go on to play in the NFL, and then only like 10% of them continue after year 4. I probably butchered those stats, but it's something like that. So you're watching not only the losing, but you're watching the end of a lot of these careers. And the pain, it's hard for me sometimes to even focus on the winners because of how sad I get very maternal looking at these guys on the bench with their eyes red and towels over their heads and sort of wandering around lost amid the confetti or back into the tunnel. It really makes me sad, but I do watch it, which I don't know what that says about me. I think, I watch a lot of sad movies too, so there's probably something there.
Too, yeah. Yeah.
But I watch the championship celebration of any sport, if I'm being honest. It's sort of my favorite part.
Boy, right in the face of Mike, who can't watch it all.
That's sort of deranged. You just say that you want to looking at all the sad kids, and now I'm like, are you kind of a sicko now? Is that what this is?
It's drama. It's camp in some form. I think it's the closest sports gets to pulling back the curtain and seeing behind the wings on the main stage. I think.
While most people are looking at the people jumping around happy, Charlotte's scanning the sidelines for the sad players.
I'm like, who's crying? Look at them. Who's actually crying?
And everybody treats it differently. I remember Herm Edwards, talking about it, and others who have gone to a Super Bowl and lost. Some say they stay on the field and let the confetti hit them and say, I want to know the feeling of this because I want to get back the next year. In college, I saw, now that was your last game, Mike, so I don't imagine you're going to get anything out of that. But I did see a couple of Washington players, and I didn't know who they were, sitting on the bench watching. And my only thought was, they're guys who are coming back to school, and at least that's what I assumed, and they want to see what that's like and say, let's stamp this moment, in our minds and in our hearts now as we get ready and prepare for next season and say we want to be on the other side of that, or you just get the hell off the field. So everybody treats it differently.
That is what I wanted to ask you guys about, because we have seen this has become a thing. Like, it's not even just guys sitting on the bench. It's the guy very overtly standing on the field. Stephon Diggs pretty famously did this in one of their postseason runs where he stood on the field and watched the confetti and celebration. Got to be honest, feels a little look at me, Louie. Like, it feels a little bit stagey for me because it's just, and maybe certain guys are actually motivated by that. And Lord knows, I said yesterday, losing this game in particular, and the farther you go and the closer you are to maximum pain that feeds Charlotte Wilder with the sweet tears of big boys, I think that is obviously a motivator, but I don't know, in that moment, like, it all sucks. Like, if you're sitting there, it's usually because you're tired and you're kind of overwhelmed there. But besides that, like, I just wanted to get back and be with my teammates more than I wanted to sit and watch a bunch of other people have fun. Like, I lost that game. I went and dapped up the few guys that I went directly against for the majority of the game and just, gave them their flowers for a pretty cool battle because it was, that kind of game, and then went on about my way. So I've always been quietly kind of out on that. Like, I'm not going to come out and dog guys too bad, but it just feels like one of those things that's more for the photo than it is for the function.
I think that today it's very hard to see anything on such a public stage and not think, is this for optics? Is there something you're trying? Right. Is there another layer of what you're doing here rather than just sitting there? I think the most charitable read is probably like, maybe even if it is their last game, there's something incredibly cool and rare about playing in a national championship. And even if you lose, part of what I was hoping watching those guys on the bench is that they were able to still think, wow, what an unbelievable experience to cap off our incredible season that we actually got here. And we're here and taking some of that moment in remembering that it happened. I don't know. Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it's happened. Like, I don't know. I'm reaching here, but
I want Charlotte to get these images of players in the most painful moments in these games with like embroidered fun, like sayings like that on the side. Like the picture of JJ McCarthy from last year looking at Georgia celebrating with "Don't smile, cry because it's over. Smile because it happened."
Oh my God, I did that to myself. I will own that.
Yeah.
I will own that. Oh my God.
Not many players will buy into that thought process right after a game. They may later. I don't know if you ever did, Mike. I know it took you a long time to watch the game film, but at some point, as I've said, I'd rather be there and get smoked than not be there at all because you have zero chance to win a championship unless you're in the championship game. So at some point, I would imagine for you it had to be, you know what, we had a hell of a year. Didn't end the way we wanted, but man, it was great to be there.
Oh, I can tell you where the smile because it happened. We got so drunk after that game. So what people don't know is like you have to have everything planned for the party either way. Like you have to plan in case you are going to win and have the necessary materials. And we had a whole area set up near the hotel where we were staying that was going to be the after party. One way or another, those beers were going to get drunk. And these just happened to be sad beers. But to the point I've always hammered home, and for me, for TCU, for the other teams that got blowed the hell out. Washington was in this game a lot longer, so I'm sure they processed after the fact, but I got to process my football mortality in like the third quarter of the national championship. We're trying to make adjustments and do what we do, but there's those moments where your mind wanders when you're down 30 and the Alabama marching band's playing Roll Tide Roll one more time, where you're like, all right, I go through all these complex emotions. I try and make sure I don't cry on camera because I'm not trying to give SportsCenter any ammo. And then after the game, you're like, all right, you know what? We do kind of get to appreciate the run that we just went on. We do get to exhale a little bit. It's a long year with an insane amount of work by everybody involved. And so that's why, like, after any season, any bowl game, any time where you lose and you're out, there is a catharsis because, man, you've been like a clenched fist for 3 months. And then, we went and got rip-roaring drunk. My buddy Pat went and played. I got up on stage and sang karaoke of Colder Weather by Zach Brown Band. There's a pretty great picture somewhere of me up on stage with Pat holding the microphone, and I believe Tommy Reese, who's now the O coordinator at Alabama, in the crowd, like a couple of those other guys that were on the team right in the front row. Like, we went and tied one on because what else are you going to do? The beers were there.
We were going to do our show, Mike and Mike then. We were doing it down there. We did it that next day, and we were ready to have you guys there if you won. It would have been, what a show that would have been if you guys had won, but you didn't, so we were alone on that set.
I do remember one of my lasting images was talking to you guys in the lobby of the hotel, and I get a pat on the back that says, "Hey, bud, great season, good job." And in my sadness, I look up and I looked at you guys and go, "Oh, that was Vince Vaughn. That's really cool."
Yeah.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., and Charlotte Wilder here this Wednesday. And Charlotte, glad we have you to get to some basketball headlines here, because Erik Spoelstra's life, which seems like it is tailor-made for a movie at some point, as we are going to mine the world of sports for content, Erik Spoelstra is continuing to complete the mission from the guy who famously started off as the video coordinator for the Miami Heat. We've got those old grainy 90s pictures of him cutting up game footage for Pat Riley and company. Now signs the deal for 8 years, $120 million to continue being the head coach of the Miami Heat, the most committed money in North American coaching history, sources told ESPN on Tuesday night. And Charlotte, this is one that felt very easy, considering we talked about Mike Vrabel in the NFL making something out of nothing at times in terms of rosters. Erik Spoelstra has been the coach that post Miami's Big Three, when we all thought they would just fall off a cliff, has continued to keep this group in as contenders now, with Jimmy Butler as their core and their mainstay for a while.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any more of a no-brainer in sports than it's like, oh, you have Erik Spoelstra, keep him. You know, and the 8 years, he's in his 50s. He's not an old guy. He can keep doing this for a while. I think, too, when you're the Heat and you have such a specific way of doing things, and you have Pat Riley, who has hammered home Heat culture, he would call guys to make sure they were at 6 a.m., be like, are you home? Are you going to the facility? Like, there is I don't think I fully understood the extent to which Heat culture is real in terms of the conditioning requirements, the body fat percentage requirements, the intensity that these guys play with. And if you can find it's rare, I think, to find someone like Spoelstra who can not only keep that going and enforce that kind of culture, but also inspire guys to thrive in it. I think, yes, it takes a very specific person to do well in that environment. I think that I would do very, very badly in a Heat culture situation. I'd be like, why are you telling me what to do all the time? But if you're somebody who does well with that, and you have Spoelstra to inspire and motivate and make something out of nothing. They should not, by all accounts, have been in the finals last year. There is not another coach who could have gotten them there with, I don't know if you heard, some undrafted free agents. Nobody would be talking about Gabe Vincent on the Lakers as, when he comes back from injury, something that could maybe save their season if it's not for Erik Spoelstra. So I think that it's a lot of money, but I don't know where else on earth would you put that? You know what I mean? Like it go for it.
So I guess the thing I would ask is, do some of these deals get too long? You look at from a yearly standpoint, he's second now to Pop. Pop makes 16 a year. Spoelstra now 15. Monty Williams signed that deal in Detroit, which was a 6-year deal. He's making 13 a year, and then it's Steve Kerr and Rick Carlisle behind there. I just wonder, every time you go that 8-10-year deal, how soon it gets regretted. And I'm not saying this about Spoelstra. He's done a great job. He's been with that organization since 97. As you mentioned, Mike, what he started at 97 to 08, part of the organization, behind the scenes or as assistant, and then took over in 08 as the head coach until now. I just wonder, do the longer contracts eventually get you in trouble? And this is nothing about him. I'm glad he got the money, because yearly, again, he's second, but it's the amount of years that he got where you go that long, and then all of a sudden, if it starts to turn, you start to say, oh my God, that's like when you give the 10-year baseball contract to the 32-year-old, where you know damn well the back end of it isn't going to mean a thing. So they're long deals that I think just sometimes ends up getting you into trouble.
So it's interesting, too, because it's different for coaches than players, right? Like some of those long deals, when we look at a guy like Pat Mahomes, that allows you to play with the money, especially when you know. And that's usually the different line in sports. Like with Spo, you know he's a quality coach. You know he's the kind of guy that can win you championships. He seems so supported by all the guys that have played there. And to Charlotte's point, he can enforce a very specific style that's germane to that place. He knows it and he's of it. So maybe eventually, because we see in the NBA, when things go wrong, the coach is usually first to go. Miami does feel like they operate a little bit differently, and Spo has kind of been able to shoulder that load through so many different situations at this point that you do feel a little bit more insulated, and you throw the age on top of it that Charlotte mentioned as another reason why you might feel comfortable that you're still going to get plenty of this guy's best years. It is interesting hearing Charlotte talk about Heat culture, and I don't know why I've never kind of like made this connection before. They're kind of like if you put the Patriots in Miami, right? Where if you just gave this place where the whole is supposed to be better than the sum of the parts, and you're supposed to swallow your ego, and obviously the big 3 years are this historic outlier in terms of, all right, the way that we're going to about building this. But in the Jimmy Butler Heat era, it's very much, look at our superstar and how he plays and how he goes about his business, and let's use that and the way we coach him hard, the way he holds everyone else accountable to make everyone else live up to that ungodly standard here. They just have a nice beach and sunsets and live in all the places that they can sell you that aren't in Foxborough.
I was going to say the difference is that the two places professional athletes would most like to be is Southern California and Miami. So I think there's that. But yes, Mike, I think there's also, I think Spoelstra probably found the thing that Belichick was missing, which is the ability to still get through to players or to not seem aloof. I think that there is an element of we're in this together that the Heat have managed to keep while still demanding a lot of their players that I do not think New England was able to keep together. And I think if you're going to be draconian, if you're going to be so intense, there has got to be the humanity part of it, because otherwise you're going to end up in a situation like we see Belichick in now, where also people are like, was it just Tom Brady? Because no one's saying that. No one's saying that of the Heat. No one's like, was it just LeBron James? Was it just Dwayne Wade? Like, yes.
But also, they were then, and I think that's part of why what you just said, Charlotte, is the case it is now, because when Spo got the job to start, everyone just looked at him as like a third thumb or another ear stuck on your back, where it's like, what do you actually do here besides get out of LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh's way? And so him coming in to start, Dad, it wasn't like we talk about the beginning of the Belichick-Brady years where Tom Brady was sort of along for the ride with this Belichick defense that was the Warhammer. You had Spo come in, and his introduction to this at the highest level was, hey, you've got 3 incredible players here, and if you screw it up, it's somehow going to be your fault and not theirs. And I think that sort of informed the rest of his tenure to where now we look and we see him standing on his own 2 feet, but his start was anything but that.
Yeah. No, listen, and you talk about cultures, of course, it's Bill Belichick fingerprints, it's Pat Riley fingerprints as well. And remember, even before the big 3, they had Shaq there in Miami with Dwayne Wade trying to do their thing as well. But I agree with Charlotte. They just keep going. They just keep kind of retooling. And I was stunned to see them in the finals last year. And also, who was happy out there is every coach, because that deal was the most committed money in North American coaching history, $120 million, right? So, I mean, the next coach who's doing well is like, hey, and that agent's pointing to that deal and saying, we want $1 above that because that's how this thing works.
Well, it's sort of nice.
America.
Yeah. It's sort of nice, though, to see go to a coach where you're like, okay, I get it, because otherwise, it's a John Gruden, Like it's nice to remember when he had like the 10-year absurd amount of money.
Oh yeah.
Like, are we sure? So I just think that it's nice when you see a deal like this, and instead of being like, okay, well, good for him, you're like, oh, well, yes, of course, because I understand the value of that person in that specific place.
Yeah, and he's done it over such a long time. Like I think the idea of the meritocracy is sort of a fairy tale in sports. We know it's not always that, but in general, that's why we lionize this place. And you look at a guy that started off his career with LeBron, Wade, and Bosh getting all the credit, and then always had the specter of Pat Riley in the background that people were going to credit first, and he just kept going and going until everyone had to look up and go, maybe Erik Spoelstra is just a damn good basketball coach, and now he is paid like the best. I want to get to the statements from Draymond Green, who addressed the media for the first time coming back from his indefinite suspension with the Golden State Warriors. And I thought acquitted himself very well. We were talking yesterday kind of in a jaded way about the notion of a lot of suspensions in sports and this idea of guys actually changing. And it seems like Draymond might actually be primed to do that. But I can't help but address my father has been warring against cold coffee during the break here with us. I don't know how this came up, the debate of hot or cold coffee. Well, as I sit here drinking a gallon of cold brew every morning, my dad believes that hot coffee should be the base level coffee. And Dad, you're ticked off because you believe going into, I thought it was restaurants, but you believe anywhere it should be hot coffee as the baseline and then everyone else should have to adjust.
Yes, I go into coffee places, like known coffee places, and I say, give me a large coffee, and they would say hot or cold. My point is, it should be assumed that if you just say, give me a cup of coffee, that's a hot cup of coffee. And you should have to specify if you want your nitro or your whatever you want that you drink, the different things. I think you should have to specify that because I've been asked many times when I said, love a cup of coffee, hot or cold. And I just kind of shake my head like the old man on the porch and say, well, this is the times now. I just have to deal with it. And I say the normal way, hot, you young jerk. That's usually how I end the, no, I don't. I'm just kidding, obviously. I'm just kidding. But no. I do get asked that. I do not do that. But Charlotte, you said you're a hot coffee drinker, but that's what I found in some of these places. I just feel hot should be assumed. Well,
I feel like you're in Arizona where it's hot a lot of the time, so people are probably like, well, most people get cold. Do you want to? I'm not saying that is correct. I think that a lot of people in New England are like, I drink iced coffee all year round. I'm the opposite. I want a hot coffee all year round. I don't know. Something about starting off your morning, something warm, feels nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
my brand of pseudoscience, I ascribe to the idea that hot coffee is better for hangovers because I need a warm embrace on those days where I'm not feeling my best self.
No.
You don't like
you need
hot
something
coffee
cold
when you're hungover?
No.
Oh.
I'm not hungover that often anymore, though, not to brag.
Yeah.
No, I'm not either.
I chug water. Yeah. But I chug water and I drink hot coffee. I agree with you. And quickly on the point of I live in a hot place, we can all agree hot coffee has been around a lot more than cold coffee, right? And hot places have been around forever. So, I mean,
I think my IQ is dropping the more we talk about this.
Your IQ's dropping because you're on this show with Mike and I. That's why your IQ is dropping.
No.
We're the fault.
I also think, Dad, you're mistaken.
I usually am
you're
very
walking into
smarter.
Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts where there is a lot more of a supply and demand issue when it comes to the hot-cold debate. Like when I go to restaurants where I have to sit down, breakfast places, diners, there it is always assumed hot until you specify otherwise. Cold coffee is a much more alien creature in those locations where when I went out every weekend on the road and went to breakfast with Tom Bowman and our crew for college football Saturday night, when we would go to breakfast and we would say 3 coffees over to the table, they were always hot coffees until specified otherwise. So I think that's where you have that rule that reigns. But for Dunkin' Donuts and for Starbucks and all those places, you have probably just as many, if not more, ordering cold at this point. And so for them, the math is different.
I just want them to know that my hot coffee is still the dominant coffee and has been.
Yes.
But you're right about restaurants. Well, you go to a restaurant, they have a coffee cup on the table already. So you're right. It's assumed you want hot coffee unless that you have to specify, because you don't put the cold coffee in a regular coffee cup. So I'm with you on that from the restaurant standpoint. Boy, did we get sidetracked.
I love you guys.
Just a little bit. You know what? I wonder what kind of coffee Draymond Green would drink. Let's ask him, maybe not about that, but hear what he had to say about his return and what people should expect from him now back in a Golden State Warriors uniform.
When I look back on these situations, it's like, can you remove the antics? I'm very confident I can remove the antics. And I'm very confident if I do remove the antics, no one's worried about how I play the game of basketball. Nobody's worried about how I carry myself in the game of basketball, but it's the antics. And so that's my focus. It's not on changing who I am completely. Like, you don't change the spots on a leopard. Like, it's just not going to happen, and I'm not going to try to set some unrealistic expectation.
So, Charlotte, we talked a lot about this yesterday. What's your impression been between Draymond's podcast and this about how he's acquitted himself coming off this?
I think the whole situation has been strange to me because he chokes out Rudy Gobert and everyone's like, oh my God, Draymond is such a problem. And then he hits Nurkic in the face and all of a sudden it's a mental health issue. And it becomes like, well, Draymond has to go to counseling. Draymond needs help. KD says, I hope Draymond gets the help he needs, which Draymond addressed on his podcast as well. And I think that the line here that I don't know can be towed is Draymond has won 4 championships with the Warriors because of how he plays basketball, because he is that enforcer, because he is that fire for that team. And in the past year, you've seen him sort of unravel a little bit. I think a lot of the players on the Warriors, and by that I really mean, Clay and Draymond, are having a hard time accepting their own mortality and the end of this dynasty. Even if it keeps going for a little bit, it's not going to be what it was before just because of physics and time. But I think that it's very hard to say to someone, hey, be less of the thing you're doing up to a certain point. how do you tell someone, do your job the same way, be what you've been, but take out the part that we don't like, when that part in that moment is like, how is he, when he says take out the antics, I'm confident I can take out the antics. The antics is a whole thing, buddy. Like, nobody's talking about how you're playing he says, nobody will care how I play basketball if it's not for the antics. And it's like, well, right. Like, yes, the antics are the whole point. Nobody cares if you play hard defense. That's great. They care if you're choking guys out. And I also think that there's this, when he said to Adam, he was on his podcast, he said he threatened to retire to Adam Silver. And Adam Silver said, don't make any rash decisions. That to me is like, wasn't the whole point of this suspension that he stopped making rash decisions? And here he is being like, I said on Oddball yesterday, it's like a little kid being like, well, I'm going to run away from home. Like, Adam Silver said, don't retire. If I were Adam Silver, I'd be like, go for it. Okay, call his bluff. And so and none of this is to rag on Draymond, because I do respect what he has done as a player so much. I obviously don't respect a lot of what he's done. The antics, I don't like the antics, I guess you could say. But I still think it's just, I'll believe it when I see it. I think at this point, there's not really much you can say except go out there and play without, hitting guys in the nuts, really.
It's the classic line of a parent when a kid says, I'm going to run away, and the parent says, don't run, walk. Nobody's going to chase you. Kind of the reverse psychology of that. I did like him saying, listen, a leper can't change his spots. Don't expect miracles. I just need to stop the antics. And you're right, Charlotte. I mean, it is all the antics. No one questioned his basketball play. And Mike Tomlin was the latest to say it, but coaches say it all the time. I'd rather have a player I need to say whoa to than give me more. Well, Draymond is the player you got to say whoa to, right? And if he can make the realization that he's actually hurting his team, he's a line stepper. And like I said, line steppers aren't going to change. And he even admitted they're not going to change. So all along, this has been about the antics. It's never been about the basketball. So you can separate these two and say, we love the basketball player. That's what I said. I'd rather could be a teammate with the basketball player, but not the antics guy that hurts the team. The end of the day, Mike, he can say all he wants, but you got to go out and you got to show that you're not going to do something dumb on the court that's going to cost you and your team.
Yeah, this is going to be an actions speak louder than words moment, which is very difficult because Draymond's words are often very, very loud. I enjoy the antics on Oddball. I enjoy the antics from Charlotte Wilder every Wednesday with us here. Charlotte, thank you so much, buddy. We appreciate you.
Thank you, guys. I hope the coffee stays both hot and cold.
Boom. Welcome back to GoJo Golic, hour number 2 here. Mike Golic Jr. and Mike Golic Sr. We got Chris Long coming up here in a little bit, former New England Patriots and Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl champion. I'll be very curious to hear, Dad, his read on what's going on in Foxborough right now, both with the impending departure in Bill Belichick and how that might look somewhere else. Like, I think that's the one thing I've had a hard time reconciling, as we've talked about, Bill Belichick to the Chargers before, and now we see all these reports in recent days about the Atlanta Falcons' potential interest in Bill Belichick and what it might look like. We've seen people trying to export the Patriot way in the form of all their assistants and the coaching tree that's failed at basically every non-Bill O'Brien turn outside of the nest in Foxborough. How that's going to look with the original in Bill Belichick making his way out of there potentially based on what Chris saw under the hood there in New England, what everyone kind of knows about that place.
Yeah, you just wonder if Bill continues to coach, and I do think he wants to continue to coach. I think, Mike, where does he fall in the line of if you're a team that needs a coach on the queue, right? Where is he? Because we see the young coaches like the hot coordinators, more than a few coordinators out there that are big, names being mentioned. But for the sake of this argument, Ben Johnson, the hot old coordinator from the Detroit Lions, who looks like he's going to get multiple chances somewhere. Where all of a sudden, if Bill is done in New England and we have this jumbled list of potential head coaches from, retreads to new coaches, where is Bill? Where is Bill in that?
So that's interesting to consider because Mina Kimes tweeted this yesterday, ESPN NFL analyst, that this might be one of the best coaching free agent classes we've ever seen. Because in terms of guys with proven NFL chops, you've got Mike Vrabel now out there, Bill Belichick potentially out there, Jim Harbaugh is a guy whose name has been battered about in these conversations. And then from the group of coordinators getting ready to step up, you've got Mike McDonald in Baltimore, Ben Johnson, Raheem Morris, Bobby Slowick, all of these young coaching, what we feel like are stars, guys that are primed to get back into it. You're right in that it almost feels like an embarrassment of riches this offseason. As far as Belichick, Dad, I think I would always prorate, especially the guys that have been successful. It's one thing to have retread head coaches in the NFL that ended their tenure, and Bill's limping out of New England, but we know he's arguably the greatest coach of all time in the NFL.
Right.
I would probably have Harbaugh and Vrabel above just because of age. Like, you've still got the potential for a longer timeline with those guys, and maybe to the point we talked about earlier about interpersonally, Jim Harbaugh a bit of a jackhammer, so maybe this is more towards Vrabel, but being able to connect with guys in a different way. So I would probably go Vrabel and Harbaugh first, especially with age on their side, and then have Bill after that.
Well, I think, Mike, because the way you look at it now, if a team needs a head coach, they obviously have issues, and a lot need to kind of start over, except we talked about with the Chargers. They have a quarterback right now, the most important position on the field. It seems like if you're a team bringing Bill in as a 70-something head coach to a team that needs to kind of restart wouldn't be the move, right? I mean, that doesn't seem like the move to make as we are trying to kind of gain our traction again, starting over. A lot of these teams with a new quarterback that, a 70-something, and I don't mean it in an age discrimination way. I mean it in a younger coaches. I talked about it earlier with the copycat league of the motion teams with McVay and Shanahan and McDaniel, and what Ben Johnson does in Detroit, of just where we are in churning out types of offenses and teams. If Bill doesn't fit that mode, even what Amy Adams, the owner in Tennessee said, through that corporate statement she made, it was basically, we want more voices with more input, and we want to basically, freshen up what we do on the field.
Yeah, I do think there's something too. Like you mentioned, the age factor is in this for a couple of reasons, but like I think of Pete Carroll, who just came out the other day and said he wants to continue coaching. He's not worn down by this. Pete, who is every bit Bill Belichick's. I think Pete's the oldest coach in the NFL, right? He's like 72.
Pete is. It's Pete, then Bill. Yes.
But you look at Pete, and I think it's how their styles age, and Pete's relentless positivity as an ethos ages a lot better even with younger players than Bill Belichick, where that sort of approach versus now what we've seen with Trent Brown and others coming out and talking about, the Patriot way is not nearly as fun when you're not guaranteed a trip to a championship every other year, and so it's a little bit harder to swallow a lot of those other elements there. I think factors into that equation, but he should still be highly sought after, especially, Dad, if he's going to go along with what he insinuated about potentially staying in New England, where we heard him talking to the media after saying he'd be open to relinquishing some of the GMing responsibilities. That's been really the biggest hang-up with the Belichick tenure, especially towards the end.
It has, but either way, a move has to happen soon, right? I mean, you can't dilly-dally in these situations. You got to get, if you're going to get a new coach, then obviously that coach has to have the assistants. Remember, all these head coaches have their list of assistants who may be under contract, may not be under contract. It's a process that you have to go through. So if Bill's staying, I mean, I guess they can go as slow as they want, and knowing Bill, they wouldn't even announce it. He would just, and he would make it sound like, well, I'm under contract, so of course I'm here. Make it sound like it was a foregone conclusion anyway, and we just continue on with what we're doing. But if they are going to make a change, that's got to happen sooner rather than later.
I'd imagine we won't get out of this week. Like, it sounded like all the reports that we heard out of that situation basically said this was going to be about a respect thing, even if a move was made. I didn't expect Bill Belichick to be a Black Monday firing where he was unceremoniously dumped after the tenure that he's had. I'd imagine the Crafts and Bill Belichick, there's a little bit more respect between both sides than we normally see in a lot of these spots. So I would imagine if it is going to happen, though, you're right. We've seen interviews. Plenty of other places have interviewed a variety of candidates at this point. We've seen the list that a bunch of places are going after, so that absolutely stacks up. You mentioned about the assistants and the roles that plays in all this, Dad. I did want to touch on briefly the situation going on with the New York Giants right now. We had heard reports of friction between Brian Daboll, the head coach, and Wink Martindale, their defensive coordinator, during the season. That has now spilled over into the New York Post, where we saw the reports yesterday that apparently in the exit meetings at the end of the season, Wink Martindale cursed out Brian Daboll and then stormed out of the building, and it birthed one of my favorite pictures now on the internet, which is a picture from it wasn't LaGuardia, I think it was Newark, where Wink Martindale was waiting at the gate to go to his home in Sarasota, and he is dressed exactly like he dresses on NFL sidelines, with the cutoff hoodie, the white undershirt with the NFL logo on it, and some joggers. That to me was art, and it's a reminder that none of this is an act with these coaches. It's like seeing Guy Fieri in the wild. None of what you see on TV is an act. That is who that dude is 100% of the time.
Oh, there is absolutely no doubt about it. And this is interesting because, we've never been in this situation. You go somewhere, and a lot of times, obviously, you bring your people with you. And he's 60 years old. He's been in this gig for a long time. And listen, by numbers, their offense and defense, let's be honest, they both stunk. They were both in the lower third toward the bottom of overall yards per game on both sides of the ball. And you can't go on numbers all the time, but it didn't fare well. And Daboll had already let go of special teams coach and O-line coach, the O-line coach Bobby Johnson, who obviously when Daboll became the head coach, he brought in some coaches that had been with him for a while. And that was
reportedly a guy that meant a lot to him. Right. Bobby Johnson was apparently one of Daboll's guys. So that was this idea that he was letting someone go that was close to him.
Exactly. So you get in situations where, listen, the head coach brings in his entire staff. So he's obviously either friends with them or loves their coaching and where they came from and starts a relationship with them, and you have to make the hard decisions. But supposedly he told Wink Martindale, you got to fire the Wilkins brothers. Drew Wilkins is the old outside linebacker coach, and Kevin Wilkins, a defensive assistant. Now, Kevin has been with Wink for 9 years, and Drew has been with Wink for 10 years. They go back to the Baltimore years and such. So they have been with him for a while. When Wink came to the Giants, he brought these guys, and Daboll basically said, and this isn't a first. This is, we want you back as a coordinator, but you have to. We're going to think about firing some of those on your staff. Wink wanted no part of it. And got in a bit of a shouting match, and as Mike said, took off. So I don't know where this is headed. It's possible he may resign. He's got one more year on his deal at $3 million a year. So however that situation would work itself out. But I know for a fact, and knowing coaches over the years, that this isn't something out of the ordinary where one coach is going to stay who heads a group and you have to fire some in that group. So Wink just, it seemed at that point, just wasn't having any of it.
Well, this is one of those, and we always talk about with the defense here, you're right, they weren't great. I think they were even 21st in DVOA. So stats that are supposed to kind of strip away some of the context that sometimes affects these units, specifically the offense for the Giants, which was dreadful, which dealt with injury this year. And, complementary football-wise absolutely has an effect on defensive performance. But this seems to be the height of the rift we always talk about. Dad, the Philadelphia Eagles teams you lived on for years where the offense never held up their end of the bargain or rarely did enough to where you have some awkward interactions between offensive and defensive players. This seems to be that on the coaching level where I'd imagine there's some frustration for Wink Martindale and their group that at times played well and tried to buoy this team this year, was far less injured, had some players you can point to like Dexter Lawrence that are near the top of their position, where there's frustration about not getting the kind of help you think you should be getting from the other side, and then being told, hey, some of your guys have to pay for what I'm sure Wink Martindale does not think is his problem.
Yeah, exactly right. And so you get head coaches every year having to make changes because, let's be honest, next year when the season starts and we sit there and talk about hot seats, Daboll's probably going to be on one, right? I mean, he's probably going to be there. So, if you're running that show, you're going to take responsibility, and which you should if you're the head coach, you make the changes that you deem necessary to make, whether it's personnel or sometimes we've seen offensive coaches, get rid of the coordinator who's calling the plays and start calling the plays themselves, basically saying if this ship's going down, it's going to go down with me making the decisions because I'm the head coach. I'm going to have control over this, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I'm getting fired anyway, so I'm going to make the decisions that I feel I need to make. And when you're the head coach, that's one of the things that comes along with it that you get to do.
Yeah, that you have to do. And part of that, you're right, ends up becoming self-preservation. And it will be interesting with Brian Daboll next year. He was coach of the year last year. He was on cloud 9 taking the Giants team to the playoffs in year 1 of his tenure that a lot of people didn't expect, and it came crashing down a bit this year. I think it's going to be interesting how bad it would have to go for them for Daboll to also get punished. Because remember, after next year, Daniel Jones' contract becomes very easy to offload. Right. That was essentially a 2-year deal masquerading as a 4-year deal. And so if they get through next year and you still look at the things in the bones of Brian Daboll's operation and say, this feels good enough, and oh, by the way, he can go get his quarterback in there now, which usually really starts the clock, then I would imagine that's the normal course of events, but we don't know, especially now, because part of it with Wink, Dad, is you mentioned before there was the rumor or talk that he might have resigned, but if Wink Martindale resigns, the way the coaching contracts work, the Giants could block him from going somewhere else. Right. They could make this really ugly, and so this does kind of seem like a show of force from Wink Martindale to say, hey, I'm going to make this really ugly unless you fire me and give me what I want, which is the hell out of here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we keep talking about players, but the coaching circle is unbelievable of connections down there. If you start to, and we get to do it, in calling games when you have to do, talk about the coaches and talk to coaches, but just seeing the circle of coaches and where they all met. Some met at interns, at some Division II school, 2 decades ago, and they started their relationship then. And it is amazing how relationships go. And to, again, this point, Wink had it with the Wilkins brothers and, was upset that they were going to let go. It's all part of connections.
I mean, what you go through, I always said, and I told this to people when I was at ESPN, but you have a hard time, like the way you trust working in this kind of environment in sports, both as a player and as a coach, is uncommon. The amount of time you spend together and the situations you're in where physical well-being is something that's on the line, you tend to have to trust and be trusted by others in a way that's not required in most jobs in real life. And so with coaches, you think about the long hours they go through, Dad, I always think of that Washington staff. You look at the coaching staff from the Washington Commanders years ago under Mike Shanahan that's now birthed Kyle and Sean McVay and Mike McDaniel and all these guys. And you even look at the guys that have followed through those groups, like Bobby Slowick, who was an assistant under those guys, was like the NFL equivalent of a graduate assistant or whatever the hell they call it, an analyst or a specialist on that staff in Washington. So these guys, because they've seen others do the work, those coaching fraternities are built on that idea of loyalty, and it creates some friction like this every once in a while. Speaking of friction in coaching, by the way, Dad, are we watching the bit of backtracking that's trying to go on right now with the Russell Wilson market in Denver right now? Sean Payton coming out the other day, and I believe we have the sound of him talking to the media about the future of the situation and a potential return for Russell Wilson in Denver.
And I told him, I said, look, I don't think it's going to be a long, drawn-out process, but it hasn't been decided relative to what our plans are. And but as soon as we know something that certainly, he would be the first to know. Yeah, otherwise it would have been like, hey, goodbye, and yeah. And so I said that, I think, to you guys way back when. We'll look at all the scenarios and try to do what's best for the Broncos. But communication will be important, and that final decision hasn't been made.
So is this, Dad, basically them trying to say, hey, maybe someone might want to trade for this guy, right?
I mean, I'm trying to figure out what's the situation, right? Because I don't think anybody's trading for him. I mean,
that was a joke.
The tab you're picking up, I mean, come on. Again, he hasn't even started the extension. The money is ridiculous. So, yeah, nobody's trading for him. So I'm wondering, with Sean Payton, what's the situation? What is the wait? What are you waiting for? Is the quarterback on your roster now? Anyone not named Russell Wilson? Are they the quarterback of the future? Are you hitting, obviously, free agency? Are you hitting the draft? I mean, and those are decisions. Free agency doesn't hit till March. The draft isn't until April. So what is the wait when he says, to make the decision, we're waiting for the situation to unfold? Okay, what is that will make us say, Russell, yeah, you're not going to be on the team anymore?
Yeah, I don't know. I think in general, NFL teams probably have an aversion to showing all their cards, which the Broncos did in this situation, really, because Russell Wilson decided to show all the cards in this. All the reports that we saw that were corroborated by Russ in person. Like, I laughed when Sean Payton said, this isn't going to be some long, drawn-out process, and when we know it'll be communicated, I'm like, well, yeah, because if it's not to Russ's liking, he's going to put it out there to make sure that you guys don't win the PR battle over him. That's what went on during the season, and why we know the way the sausage is being made right now, in a way that I'm sure is affecting the market for the future decision makings the Denver Broncos are trying to make. Because, Dad, at this point on Tankathon, they're slotted for the 12th pick in the draft. They were just good enough to not be in position to get one of the really good quarterbacks. And I think we've seen, obviously, with Michael Penix Jr. coming back down to earth, J.J. McCarthy, Jaden Daniels, the eval for the non-Drake May and Caleb Williams quarterbacks is going to be fascinating to try and determine if one of them's worth swinging on in the area outside of the top 10 in this draft. And so for the Denver Broncos, maybe this was a last-ditch, hey, are you real? Like, would you be thinking about reworking some part of your contract to stick around? Because maybe Denver's looking at their prospective options and going, I don't know how much better this can get in a moment of clear evaluation. Because we got during the season, Dad, the injury guarantee kicking in, like him getting hurt means you're out a lot of money and you have no agency over this decision. Maybe now that they've got time and room, there could be some willingness to work around this on both parties to appease what goes on going forward, understanding that both might have limited prospects outside of this current relationship.
See, the bottom line, though, and I agree with you, maybe it is about, can we restructure something on something that hasn't even started yet? I don't even know how that works, quite honestly. But here's what I do know, that Russell Wilson is guaranteed X amount of dollars, and Russell Wilson is going to have a job somewhere in the NFL next year. And Denver's going to end up paying a lot for that. So there's not a whole lot of I don't have to compromise in Russell Wilson. He doesn't. He doesn't, unless he just wants to do it to stay in Denver. He's going to work next year, and he's going to get his guaranteed money that Denver said.
He's going to get his guaranteed money. You and I are very far apart on the confidence in Russell Wilson being a guaranteed starter for someone next year. You're probably right. I just have a little bit hard of time seeing it being a slam dunk at this point. Like Russell Wilson 5 years ago? Yeah, absolutely. Russell Wilson now, where the stock is as depressed as any point in his career, I'm a lot less confident in that being a home run in the way that's great for Russ, in the same way that maybe staying in this current environment could be great for Russ. We'll talk about that more of the future for some of the other coaching jobs around the league with Chris Long coming up here next. All right, welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Very excited to welcome in our next guest. Two-time Super Bowl champion, former NFL defensive end, and now host of the Green Light podcast. Chris Long, kind enough to join us here now. And we were off air talking about what I realized is the total role reversal. Chris, your dad, Howie, just had a birthday, and we were talking about how difficult it is to buy for the man that has everything at this point. Did you get your dad anything this year?
No, I can't remember the last time I got him something like intentionally for his birthday because, like if you get him something, everybody in the family knows he has everything and he doesn't really want for much. He wants things for other people. He's like that kind of guy. And, usually that's cliche and it sounds cool, but he actually really doesn't want anything for his birthday. So usually I just text him, call him. Video from the kids is great. Yeah. But I love the fact that you guys are stealing each other's clothes still. Because that's what me and my dad do. It's the same thing.
Yeah,
but you steal from him, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I steal from him. And you know what the best part is? He's got this Skechers deal now. And, he'll get like 100 pairs of sneakers. And that's his way. His gift, my gift to him is me accepting 40 pairs of Skechers that he has stockpiled.
There you go.
In the closet. And I don't even know what to do with them, but he'll bring them over and I don't say no. And that's my gift to him.
It's a beautiful, but I'm like that too. Don't need anything. You've accumulated it all over the years, so I don't want to make somebody go buy something just to buy something. And it probably works because I don't know if Kyle is in there too, but like me, Mike, and my other son, Jake, we all wear the same size shoes. So that works well. I don't know if you and your dad and Kyle all wear the same size shoes, so it's easy to spread those shoes around.
I think it is easier to spread the shoes around. Now Kyle has like cinder blocks for feet, so he needs like some special wide body shoes, you know.
You got custom order those. Those come with like an E on the sizing there.
Pretty much, they're like if you had to make a shoe for a brick, that's what Kyle's foot is. And so me and my dad share shoes, but more than anything, you guys were talking about it like. He'll walk up just like you said you do, Big Mike, and he'll be like, this is nice. What's this? And then he'll just walk to the other side of the kitchen. And next thing you know, he's either got the same thing or my thing's missing. But I started it because I had been walking in his closet since I was 18 years old and, you know, stealing his clothes. So
that is true. This is a real what goes around comes around moment for the Suns in this situation.
Yeah,
so
no question.
I think we're getting what we're owed out of this equation here. Chris, let's talk a little ball with you here. We got a lot of stuff going on right now. The NFL coaching world got rocked. The Vrabel news yesterday. How surprised were you by that?
I was a little surprised. I mean, I guess you're never surprised. I think if a Mike Vrabel were coaching in the 90s, he'd probably be coaching for 10, 12 years in one place. You know, the things he's been able to do there, I know they've lost some games over the last 2 years, especially in division. That record kind of snuck up on me. Their offense hasn't been great, but he disguises the floor of that organization so well. And, you know, it's just like he disguises the floor any given Sunday on a macro level. I think he's been able to get them out of some really ugly jams that would have been uglier. He's one of my favorite coaches to watch. I also thought it was interesting watching Amy Adams-Strunk's press conference. Yeah. It was kind of more like public access TV. It was shot like public access TV. They were just like, hey, you're fired, Mike. All right, let's do the post firing interview right here in the HR office. The set is crazy to me that they decided to do it this way. But I guess she knew it was going to be such an unpopular move that she was like, I got to get out in front of this. And what was interesting to me was they asked about the trade, and she said, I didn't consider it because I would have to wait 3 weeks and go to the back of the line. But juxtaposed to a minute later, they asked what you've learned in the hiring cycle, and she said, cast a wide net and take your time. Now, I also learned that coaches have a no trade clause, which is absurd to me relative to our situation. But I bet you Vrabel was just like, yeah, dude, I'm not going to New England. I'm not going anywhere. So you can drain the assets and send me there. I'm going to make you fire me and go somewhere else. And I think the leverage that he has, knowing his standing as a coach, when they probably walked in and were like, you got to cede some personnel control or you got to fire this guy or that guy. You know how these things go. That's when you see something surprising. I think it's usually something like that. There's an ultimatum, and Vrabel said, you know, shove it up your you-know-what, Titans. I'm Mike Vrabel.
So, you know, as soon as that happened, everybody said, oh, if Bill's out in New England, Vrabel's going to New England. Let's set that aside and let's talk about Bill. You were there for a year. I think it was 2016. You were there for a year under Bill and how Bill ran a team. So let's specifically talk about that. If Bill is gone, and I believe if he is gone, he still wants to keep coaching. He wants to get that Shula record.
I agree.
Can his style, can the Bill Belichick way work somewhere else, and it'll most likely be with a team that's kind of trying to restart?
I would think so. I mean, isn't it realistic too to say, hey, if this is a longer rebuild, maybe, you know, Bill's in his 70s and that sort of thing. Like, I feel like it can't be a full mushroom cloud situation, but, you know, something like Atlanta, you know, I don't know. You kind of have to look at these coaches and say, who have they hired before? And maybe that's going to tell you something about, like, for instance, Atlanta's never hired a former NFL head coach. You know, Blanks had 5 hires. So does that mean that he'll go back on that thing, you know, and hire a head ball coach? I think the number one thing with Bill is and you guys know this, he's the guy that wants to buy the groceries and make dinner.
Right.
And I think that's going to be an issue some places, right? And so, yeah, I do think Bill can still coach. I'm a huge Bill fan. My year there was awesome. That goes without saying. Sometimes people, I don't say it, and people think I'm a big Bill fan, and I think he can still coach. But somewhere like Vegas, if it's Antonio Pierce or Bill, I don't know if Bill's the right answer. I don't think it's just because you're the GOAT in 2024 you're going to get your pick of the litter. I think it's going to be a little bit more complicated than that.
Chris, we only got about a minute left here. I want to pivot to your other former team in the Philadelphia Eagles, who are really limping into the postseason. You know what a championship outfit looks like. What's missing right now for Philadelphia, and can this get anywhere close to where they were last year?
2 coordinators, multiple DBs, multiple linebackers. I think the magic is missing a little bit. You can feel that. It's crazy to me because I lauded them for their start off of that Super Bowl run, which is really hard to do objectively. And I think what it does is it makes you appreciate New England and some of these teams that have made deep runs for years upon years. You know how hard that is. I went up there in New England and talking to guys that have played 2 extra seasons in the postseason alone. This stuff's hard, and I think Philly is a good organization. They're trying to learn how to be a great organization. And this year is, to me, a little step back. But number one, how many teams after a Super Bowl have to replace 2 coordinators? I think it might have been over before it started, and we didn't know it until December. But the compounding issues on the back end, the linebacker play, the schematics, it's tough. And I don't know if they have a shot this weekend, but I will tell you this. Yeah. They finished that Tampa game running the ball for 8 minutes, grinding out in 4-minute mode. That's what my game plan would look like.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be that way. I saw Jason Kelce talking about some of the things that he saw there, basically saying, we didn't pick up blitz in that game. There were things that he saw that felt a little bit more concrete. And, if Jason Kelce, if this is the end of the road for him, he's not going to go out here with anything less than their absolute very best. Chris, we can talk to you forever, man. We appreciate the time this morning. Everybody, obviously, check out the Greenlight Podcast. It's awesome stuff. We appreciate you, brother.
Appreciate you guys. Good to see you. I'll come back anytime. Just holler.
Absolutely,
thanks, Chris.
man.
Appreciate it.
Right.
See y'all.
And Dad, I think he's absolutely right about Bill. It is going to be so context driven with how that decision ends up getting made.
Yeah, and I agree as well. How the team is set up. If it's a complete blow up, Bill's not going to be the guy. You have to at least have some pieces to the puzzle there.
Speaking of quality pieces, coming up next, we'll look at the early betting favorite for next year's college football playoff. And spoiler alert, it's the same team you'd expect. boy, I know people say this a lot. Are men okay? I think the answer is decidedly no. For Darko Rayakovic, the head coach of the Toronto Raptors, after the other night. Did you see this rant after the game, Dad? Usually, we just look at this and start to see money draining from someone's bank account anytime someone takes the chopper to officiating like this. But Darko had enough. The fourth quarter free throw discrepancy between them and the Lakers was 23-2. In the fourth quarter, as the Lakers got a 132-131 win over the Raptors last night. And this was Darko after the game, holding absolutely nothing back.
That's outrageous. What happened tonight, this is completely BS. This is shame. Shame for the referees, shame for the league to allow this. 23 free throws for them, and we get 2 free throws in the fourth quarter. Like, how to play the game. I understand respect for all stars and all that, but we have star players on our team as well. How's possible that Scotty Barnes, who is all-star caliber player in this league, he goes every single time to the rim with force and trying to get to the rim without flopping and not trying to get foul calls. He gets 2 free throws for the whole game. How's that possible? How are you going to explain that to me? If that's the case, just let us know so we don't show up for the game. Just give them a win. But that was not fair tonight. And this is not happening first time for us. Scotty Barnes is going to be all-star. He's going to be the face of this league. And what's happening over here during whole season, I've been holding it back. It's a complete crap.
Wow. Scotty Barnes is going to be the face of this league. That's my favorite part, is he got so angry that he unloaded a take that maybe he actually believes, maybe, because my favorite part of that clip was, if you notice, the first time he brings up Scotty Barnes as this person that he's going to hold up as someone who's being robbed of the star treatment in this game, he has to look down to see his last name to remember it in that moment, which doesn't seem like the thing that happens to the face of the league.
Well, I mean, and then he had to come up with something when he says, I understand, how superstars are treated. And then he would bring up his own that he thought, and Scotty Barnes should have been treated that way as well. The discrepancy was a lot. And even LeBron said after the game, we knew we had an advantage on the inside, so we wanted to get the ball to Anthony Davis, because if we feel we have the advantage there, and Anthony Davis ends up with 41 points. He's 13 of 14 from the free throw line. So they had 36 free throws. Toronto had 13. And as you heard the coach screaming about, 23-2, the discrepancy in the fourth quarter. And listen, you look at a stat like that. Now, I'm not going to say I didn't watch every second of that game to sit there and have that opinion as well. But we've heard coaches and players complain some about the discrepancy in free throws, but I haven't heard it to this ferocity before. I mean, just going off. I'm sure he'll probably get a little bit of a fine for actually mentioning the refs and the league and how shameful it is. So I wonder, what kind of little slap on the wrist he may get if he gets one at all. But I get it, man. And that's a guy, obviously, it's a 1-point game. It's a 1-point game. And there is a, 23 free throw shot discrepancy? I mean, that is pretty wild, though they are a better inside team, so there's more inside play. But then there's attacking the rim as well. LeBron James was asked about it after the game, and he basically said, they fouled us a lot and we didn't foul. I mean, that's basically what his comment was about it, which, according to the refs, that's exactly what happened.
If I'm Fred VanVleet, I am very curious what this fine ends up being, because Fred VanVleet very publicly ethered Ben Taylor, an NBA official, basically saying the majority of his texts have come from him, really took him to task at some point and got fined, I believe, $30,000 for it. So we talked about the discrepancy between player and coach in the NFL with some of these rules that we were learning about trading head coaches and them all having a no trade clause here. I'm sure Fred VanVleet's going to be looking at this like, all right, what are we about to do here necessarily for coach? Because if you're the coach, you come out there and slang that. And I will say a rant like this does sound better with a Serbian accent. I will say it is somehow more damning.
Yes. Without question.
Yeah, so angry. We're at this point in time in the NBA season right now where everyone's been going just long enough to start to build up a little bit of anger at what's going on as we rapidly approach the trade deadline and the All-Star break and all the things that are going to come up here. Dad, looking elsewhere, as pivot back to the world of college football for a second, as we kind of put our eyes on the future here. Any guess as to who is the leading odds betting favorite for the 2024-2025 national championship in college football?
I mean, you don't have to throw a dart here, you know, or the dartboard is full of Georgia, right? I mean, it's got to be the same as usual, right? The Georgias, the Ohio States, the Alabamas. The question will be is where does Michigan fit in after just winning a championship? Because that's something we love to do is 5 seconds after a win, we'd like to say, great, but what about next year? Where is this team ranked next year?
Yeah, well, and next year becomes really interesting to a lot of people because it's the first year of the 12-team playoff, and you've got the 6 highest-ranked conference champions are going to get automatic bids. Then you're going to have the top 4 receiving first-round buys. The 6 highest-ranked teams will get the remaining 12 bids, so you've got more people invited to the party. And to your point, Georgia right now plus 450 on DraftKings Sportsbook to be next year's national champion. They've got a ton of guys coming back, headlined by their quarterback Carson Beck. Michigan is plus 1,000 to repeat. Washington is plus 5,000 next year. And both Michigan and Washington, Dad, going to lose a ton of pieces. I think there's people that have said Michigan might have as many as 15 draft-eligible players in terms of the grades these guys have. So you have the potential for a lot of turnover in those spots. But it comes in a year, Dad, where people have asked me a lot what the biggest difference you see being in college football next year with all the changes that are going on. USC and UCLA starting Big Ten play, Texas and Oklahoma starting in the SEC, the 12-team playoff factor. And outside of some strange helmet matchups that normally would be reserved for September when we see a lot of those out-of-conference games, Dad, I don't know if we can expect a lot to change because the blue bloods of the sport and the people that have the power and resources aren't going to be largely different. We've seen that reflected in the recruiting rankings, so I don't understand what demonstrable change people expect besides that.
One of the things to keep an eye on for Michigan anyway is it's Donovan Edwards and J.J. McCarthy, right, that can come back, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, they still can. Now I saw the latest somebody, and everybody's got a mock draft, and there's 9,000 of them. Somebody had J.J. McCarthy, I think, 12 to Denver. You know, and you wonder where his stock is right now. He was the 4th quarterback. It was Caleb, it was Drake, and it was Jaden Daniels, and then it was J.J. McCarthy. So that will be interesting because, listen, especially if he were to come back, he's got 1 loss. Now, you and I both agree we're not too sure about his pro prospects, but listen, he's getting it done in college, especially in this offense that is a great mixture of run and of pass. But as far, real quick, I wanted to ask you this. On Golic and Smetty, the pod I do with Jess Montana, we were chatting about this. Who do you think the Pac-12 teams going to the Big Ten, will they have to adjust more? Or will the Big Ten teams all of a sudden paying all the Pac-12 teams? Who do you think overall has the advantage in this, if anybody?
Well, I mean, like, obviously there's the weather factor for some of the West Coast teams like USC and UCLA that are getting ready to play, in the Big Ten. Washington and Oregon, Washington and Oregon a little bit less so because they get some cold and some bad weather up in the Pacific Northwest. As far as style of play, I do think there's going to be some adjustment. Now, Oregon's recruited well in the trenches. It's not like they're an O-line, D-line program. That's the way it's been going back to when Mario Cristobal's there, and has certainly been the same now under Dan Lanning. So, and really for UCLA and Chip Kelly, the last few years, the iterations of his time there, that's been a program defined by what they've done in the trenches, recruiting tight ends out there. So I think there'll be some adjustment. I think both sides are quite honestly going to see some things they're not totally used to. I mean, the speed that they're going to get from the West Coast is usually what the rest of the Big Ten only sees when they play Ohio State and in recent years Penn State at times. Not as much this year's unit. So I think there's going to be some give and take from both.
I got to believe, like for a team like Washington, who we just saw play, there's going to be an emphasis on run stopping people on defense, right? Because you're going to get your share of that in the Big Ten.
Yeah, you're going to have to beef up in certain spots there. I also think Washington and who they graduate at this time could have an effect on that in year one. But lots of change coming in the world of college football, no doubt. right, time to finish off with this, that, and the third. 3 quick stories, send you off into the rest of your day. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us, leave us that 5-star rating, and try and check us out here live every day, Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on DraftKingsNetwork.com, the YouTube channel, Samsung TV Plus, and more. If you miss us or any of our great guests, shout out to Charlotte Wilder of the Oddball Podcast with Amin El Hassan here at DKN, as well as Chris Long, 2-time Super Bowl champ and host of the Greenlight Podcast. You can check out them and the rest of our show wherever you get your podcasts, or available on YouTube right when the show gets done. Dad, let's get to this and celebrate a friend of the program here. Katie Nolan.
Yes.
One time for the homie, going out and getting it done last night on Celebrity Jeopardy. She wins the semifinal round in dramatic fashion, had been down big to Steven Weber, who was up there with her, but now ascends to the Celebrity Jeopardy final round, as we'll wait to figure out who else is going to be up here with her on the final stage. Big congrats to Katie Nolan, who obviously, Dad, has a fondness for you.
And I tell you, when we had her on about this, and obviously she has great taste. When we had her on about this, I was amazed. I swear she studied more for this than in school. Because, I mean, the amount of studying, and she said especially in geography, she really concentrated on. But, I mean, she really took this thing serious and prepared for it, which you have to. It's Jeopardy. It would scare the hell out of me to be on that panel for any question. And she has been spectacular outside of a round ago little math issue that she had in the finals. But she has persevered and now made it to the finals. And she does it in a Katie Nolan way, which can be a little sharp at times.
Yeah, no, I could say Katie was out here talking her talk. Last time around was kind of feeling out the space, I think, wanted to go and put her best foot forward. This time reeking of confidence, even as Steven Weber had built up a pretty sizable lead. Katie Nolan decided to open up and absolutely let it fly on here. She was the funniest one on the desk, but this one, some people were surprised at how hard Katie went at Steven Weber. Listen to this.
One of the advantages of getting older, being very good at obituary trivia.
Yes. Let me tell you something, man. Okay, seriously, I read the New York Times obituary.
Looking for your friends?
Look.
If you look at the dollar amounts in front, Steven had almost tripled Katie at that point. He had gotten a couple of the double Jeopardy answers before Katie had gotten to hers. That was the point where I knew, oh, this is alpha level competitor Katie Nolan that's come out, because she was getting ticked at how quick Weber was getting in with the buzzer, and she let it out there. That was a peek behind the curtain.
That was awesome. I mean, that's again, chess, not checkers, what she's playing. And her ability to come back and get into the finals, I can't wait. I can't wait to see what happens. She's phenomenal. I love having her on, love what she does in our area of the sports world. But to go and do this, man, the versatility, because we see that the Celebrity Jeopardy, other people do it and some stumble. And I mean, there were some in here that barely answered a question. And she's just, now in this one, again, she was down a lot, but man, to come back and win that one and see how good she is at this is really impressive. And it just means she just keeps studying now.
Yeah, she said when she was on with us, and I believe it's true, she got as famous as she has just so she could get to this moment and live out what is clearly her calling to go and dominate Celebrity Jeopardy. So shout out to Katie. We're all super proud of her and excited to watch her win the whole damn thing. Dad, let's get to that. Someone who I'd imagine has a lot of people that are way less than proud of him right now. An Alabama man named Connor Paget got stuck in an urn or a vase. We're not really sure. Jesse was very adamant that it was an urn yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm seeing it labeled, or it isn't. It's a decorative urn at a New Year's Eve party in Mountain Brook, Alabama, of a man stuck inside this vase, Dad. I don't really know how he got in there. The video that went viral was him pleading with everybody at the party to call the fire department to help get him out of this thing. And it's the terror that can only come with being so supremely Caucasian that under the influence, this seemed like a good idea.
Yeah, and then it's always at what point, and we've all done things that were bad ideas in our lives, right? And it's always at what point do you realize it? Now, if alcohol is involved in any cases, it can come at a slower rate. But for the most part, it is. It's like, okay, where did this go wrong? And we did have that discussion yesterday with Jesse about that. And when we said a vase, she said an urn. Well, I just looked up definition of an urn, Mike. You know what the definition is? a tall, rounded vase?
I guess it's an urn.
The same thing. The same thing, right? So every vase is an urn and every urn is a vase. Is that what we're saying here?
It does seem like a square rectangle situation. I thought urns were to house the dead specifically. This man very much alive and tempting fate. The folks at AL.com reached out to Padgett and were unsuccessful, but did get in touch with the account of a Twitter account, Casual Thursday, who said they were at the party and said that the cracking sound of the vase drew cheers from the crowd. There were people that assessed the vase at anywhere from $500 to $3,000 and said that Urn Guy had been up and moving around after that without pants, which were apparently lost or damaged in the incident, and said he wants a cigarette, a double Makers on the rocks, and once it acquired, he was drinking alone, having the cigarette, pantsless in the corner of the yard. So it looked like it really took a mental toll on that guy, which I would imagine it's a terrifying situation as someone that's afraid of tight spaces. I don't like being in cabinets. I'm my mother's son in that. I don't like being constricted or confined. That is one of my worst nightmares right there. Although at least for him, it's not like being in an MRI machine where it's the top you're worried about. The bottom is a little bit easier to deal with because I still have my head and my arms and my faculties.
Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, it's not your whole body. The MRI tube for a big person is very, very difficult when you got to go in head first. And just be stuck in there for 20 minutes with an inch to your nose hitting the top of the tube. But here, the lower half is constricted, but you can move your arms and head. So I don't think it would make me freak out as much as some other things.
Insane that this almost got lost in the shuffle during the week where we had the naked Bass Pro Shop guy stealing up all the headlines here. This guy not nearly naked enough to make the waves necessary here in internet fame. So, Dad, let's get to the third. We haven't seen this video yet, but this is drafting off a story we talked about the other week of the popularity of these Stanley Starbucks collaboration cups, the Stanley mugs that have taken over so much of social media, the collaboration and limited release at Starbucks, at Targets that drew lines that were basically reminiscent of hypebeasts going after sneakers, now has turned somewhat physical. So we've got a video of someone apparently trying to jump the counter at a store to steal a bunch of these Stanley cups and an employee trying to stand in their way. All right,
so basically what you're seeing... Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the guy stole the cups from the counter and is trying to get out of the Target and encountered a store employee that, like Black Friday style, decided to go full offensive line, Dad. This is mirror dodge.
So this we can break this down football-wise easily. Dude's got a box of these cups and he's trying to get out. And there's a young lady that's trying to stay in front of him, and he's kind of a stocky dude, right? He has looks like no athleticism to him. He's stocky, his gut's hanging out a little bit, but he's too strong for this young lady to stop him, right? She's trying to stay in front of him. He eventually gets by her, and then there's a moment there, Mike. There's one guy standing there stopping him, and there's a lot of space between them, and dude kind of for a moment hesitates and says, all right, this is the last guy I got to get through. It turns into a classic one-on-one situation on the football field. And this dude, because he's not athletic at all, he goes for the straight, tried to run right through him, right? He tried to run right through him. And dude that was standing in his way did a great job of keeping his feet square, shuffling and driving him east and west, not letting this running back or this thief go north and south. East and west, not out the door, dropped him on the ground, and that was the end of that.
This is backs on backers. In my mind, the guy with the Stanley Cups is a linebacker. I watched a lot of Kyron Williams, the running back for the Rams pass pro reps yesterday. This is a running back pass pro reps. I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to be willing. But you saw, dipped right before the hip, kept the eyes up, kept the hands inside. Great knee bend going into this spot.
Really was.
And ushered to the side where then you got help coming your way. This is a 5-as-1 situation. You're never pass protecting by yourself. More often than not, you can get into one-on-one situations, but we're always looking to help each other, and help eventually came. That was a great pass pro rep. I got to be honest. Grading on a running back curve, that was incredible.
He kept the quarterback clean, and he saved the Stanley Cups.
You love to see it. That's going to be on Teach Tape everywhere in an NFL locker room near you. Thanks so much. Download, subscribe, rate, review us. We'll talk to you tomorrow.